Well, good evening, Roy.
Hey, Warren. Good evening and good day to everyone that's tuning in to watch us.
Welcome to Space 1999. This episode number 13.
No, it's actually episode number 14.
Oh, we haven't been doing this that long, Roy, have we?
13,
Well,
14, are you kind of...
it seems like 13 weeks anyway.
Yeah,
But
this
no, of course, episode number 14, and this is a very exciting episode for me, and I remember. Well, considering I'm from Canada, this episode really resonated because of all of the famous snowstorm sequences, and that we're even going through this year in 2025. So, Roy, what are we going to be discussing?
Yeah, well, with that said, I can actually relate since we've been having 0-degree temperatures here in New Jersey and on also in the Northeast. So, yeah, this is an appropriate time to be discussing this episode. And to give the ITC summary, give you a little tidbit, and that is Commander Koenig and his colleagues speed through space and time into a chilling world of ice and meet former inhabitants of Earth. And of course, we were talking about episode number 14, Year One, Death's Other Dominion.
Death's Other Dominion. Fantastic episode, fantastic guest stars. Let's get right into it.
Absolutely. Always such a pleasure hearing that opening theme.
That was fantastic, put together by Catherine Bougeot. What a wonderful montage of all of the Year One episodes.
Absolutely. Truly amazing.
Yeah, for sure. And we're welcomed today by two very special guests. We have Jeff Jones with us for the first time, as well as Phillip, is it Leavenworth?
Yeah, Leavenworth.
Yeah, Leavenworth. Thank you for joining us, fellas. And this is going to be a very fun and special segment. We really don't know each other that well, and this is sort of continuing in just having as many wonderful, fascinating friends and family and stories on these weekly discussions. And this is exciting because I think you're both going to be surprised. Roy and I, we're pretty good, but I think we're going to be shocked and awed at the same time with hearing some new and different stories about your history and your involvement with Space 1999.
Well, look forward to hearing those.
Now, we're very happy to have you both on, and I'd like to say too, it's kind of what's refreshing is too, Jeff, you are part of our generation, and Phil, you are like the next generation. So that's what's wonderful about Space 1999 fandom is that it encompasses a whole range, and it's going to be wonderful to hear the history and the stories that you have to offer, Jeff, and then also hear your insight, Phil, in regards to the series and how you both became to know about the show. And we'll definitely get into that as we progress in our discussion. So thank you again for being a part of this. We've been doing this. This is actually our 14th week, and the time is going very quickly. It's 2.5 months in, and we just love hearing the different folks come to us and then also sharing with the fans out there that are viewing us to watch Space 1999, this episode.
Thanks for putting up with us, basically, in advance.
No trouble at all.
So, no, it's a pleasure to meet you both. So, for this week's episode, of course, Death's Other Dominion. Boy, where do you start? There's just so much going on here. You know, I quite often pair this episode with Full Circle, which is coming up, just because it was the diametric opposite, really, a lush tropical planet versus the frozen desert environment, and they were virtually back to back in production, weren't they? Because isn't Full Circle's next week, right, Roy?
Yeah. It is. Yeah, that's episode 15. You got it.
Yeah, but very interesting. Lots of sort of urban myth stories surrounding this episode to do with production and things like the chemicals they use to actually recreate snow, which I will say, even back in 1975 when I was a kid in Canada, it looked fake. It just didn't fly and swirl the way snow normally does. But I guess they did what they could, and in the middle of a soundstage in Pinewood, it is what it is.
I'm gonna actually jump in on that.
Yeah,
Warren. For me, I actually thought when they were outside in the snow, it definitely, the flakes were definitely bigger, but I actually could buy into it. I think it was more in the caverns for me that it kind of looked like it was a little shaky. But I really thought, in regards to with the snow that was taking place, it definitely had that air and that feel to it, where I was kind of buying into it a little bit more.
Really? Okay. Yeah. So you thought more the cavern interior looked not up to what a snow cavern would look like.
But to your point, though, there were stories about, and I remember reading this in the Making of Space 1999 by Tim Held, and there was comments about, they had worked on doing this over the weekend, preparing it, and Keith Wilson and his team, and then there was the issue of the formaldehyde, and then the strong smell, and that there were the backstories with that. But at the end of the day, everything turned out to be okay. It wasn't a quote unquote a health risk, but I mean, there were stories too that was reported. I guess Martin Landau, I guess, was having some issues where it was an irritant to the skin, so there was with that. But not to dwell on that, but in regards to, the commentary that you shared about it. But I'm very interested in Jeff and also Phil's feelings about this episode. It's definitely a classic. It definitely has its Shakespearean overtones, and there's the different references throughout the episode and the story, and the phenomenal guest stars. I mean, with Brian Blessed and John Chapnell, I mean, they both knocked it out of the park. But definitely want to hear their comments on and feelings about the episode.
Well, I'll start by saying I sort of chalked the snow up to it being alien snow. Planetary atmosphere, maybe close, but not exactly right. So
yeah.
I'll sort of forgive that.
That could be why it looks a little off. Yeah, you're right.
To be honest, this wasn't one of my top favorites in the series. Good, and I hadn't gone back and watched it for a while, but on rewatching it again, it's definitely an excellent quality episode. I think that at a much younger age, I didn't really appreciate as much as I could have Jack Tanner's predicament, if you will. And the one thing I did learn is Brian Blessed is really good at turning people into mindless hulks. On both this and the Metamorph. So
a bit of
I thought it was a very, very good episode. My biggest problem was probably how enamored Victor and Helena seemed with the whole thing. It's like they lost all skepticism. But I think the role, again, Jack Tanner and what was it? Cabot
Rowland.
There we go. Rowland. Excellently done, and just a very good episode with a lot of thought-provoking moments.
It was really, was it Turpelov that wrote this episode?
It was.
Yeah, yeah.
Along with his wife, actually, too, Elizabeth Barrows. They had she had assisted in the writing of the story. And just to remind the viewers too, Anthony Turpelov had written Earthbound, also Collision Course, and Catacombs of the Moon. And then along with Elizabeth Barrows, he wrote this episode as well as The Infernal Machine.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, he definitely injected a gravitas to the dialogue with obviously Tanner and Rowland in particular, and it worked really well. And of course, the two actors just took it and ran with it. They chewed up every scene they were in with their delivery. It was really well done.
Yeah, I mean the energy level between the two of them, they worked, they bounced off of each other very, very well. I mean, and Roland is playing almost like the mad scientist. He's trying to, and I think his intentions in the beginning are good, but it's almost, you know, what is it that, absolute power corrupts absolutely, sort of. I mean, at one point when he's with, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but when he unveils the Phoenix and talks about, pretty much, spanning, the galaxy, he says, we'll be like gods in the universe. And then Koenig says, gods. I mean, it's the power, immortality has gone to his mind, and it's really taken him past what science is supposed to be. I mean, he's doing all of these experiments to find out what changed about them, and at the same point in time doing these experiments, he's forgetting about the humanity aspect, and he's going down a very, very dark path, which of course Jack is full aware of, having been the captain of the expedition, having been the first person to submit himself to these experiments to learn about how they potentially have changed, and then becoming one of the quote unquote revered ones, and losing basically his mind, but then pulling himself out of it after a very long period of time, but then walking away with this extrasensory perception, which also is something that frustrates Cabot Rollin, because he knows that it's truthful, and he's frustrated by it.
Yeah. In the interaction between the two of them, it's almost as if you can see that the two of them have been at each other's throats for 840 years or whatever.
For good and for bad, there's a love-hate there for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So Phil, as a newer viewer, or when you discovered this episode in particular, like, was there anything about it that sort of stood out? Did it resonate with you a little differently than some of the others?
Yeah, I'd say so. Full disclosure, like my dad was very into like 1970s science fiction, so he showed me, things like Planet of the Apes, even from the movie series to the television shows that had come out in the 70s, and the animated show that happened right after that. And he, showed me things like Logan's Run, Soylent Green, things like that, and Battlestar Galactica. And in Battlestar Galactica, there's an episode where they're also on an ice planet. It's literally called The Gun on Ice Planet Zero. And so I had seen that first before I saw this episode. So in my mind, at least in my recollection, for some reason or another, these episodes blend together for some reason, but just because of that. But ultimately, I can kind of separate them out, because that one in Battlestar Galactica is more of a sort of a Dirty Dozen style story, and so it's a little different. And then this one, it's a little bit more of like I kind of liken it to sort of like a Frankenstein story, where you have kind of like the leader and like scientific minion, if you will, trying to like handle the situation that they think is going to turn them into gods or whatever. And so that's how I'm able to kind of split the two. But oftentimes when I think of this episode, I think of that one. But I try to separate them out as best I can.
Yeah, for sure. There was so much great content back in the '70s there, and Roy and I are diehard fans. We're with you all the way with Logan's Run, with Planet of the Apes, Galactica, Buck Rod. It was such a golden era of science fiction on television.
I feel
Yeah.
like I grew up with it, even though I didn't actually grow up in the 70s.
No,
Right.
and that's very cool to hear because for me personally, I it's the period of time for me. It's the '60s, the '70s, even in the '80s, and by the '90s, I start to fall off a bit. I mean, there's some things that I do enjoy in the '90s, but really, it's that core period of those 3 decades that really is my favorite. And as Warren was saying, it's something that we very much enjoy. That that period of time, and I, being a huge Battlestar Galactica fan too, of the original that took place, from 1978 to 1979. I'm totally with you on that, and that was one of the earlier episodes too. In fact, it was a 2-part episode, Gun on Ice, Planet Zero, and yeah, no, that's pretty cool. That's
I
nice.
still remember the cliffhanger, the low angle looking up at the Cylon,
Yep.
where they said continued, come back next week. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of fun. This episode as well, guys. I was thinking of it before we went on air. Here is it's got one of those famous sort of bait and switch openings where, as the viewer, you don't really know. It's sort of like TOS, Roy. It's sort of like Tomorrow's Yesterday, where it starts and you don't really know it's Star Trek until you see the Enterprise, right? Because
Right.
you're introduced to Cabot and Roland in this ice cave, right? And they're in these strange outfits, and you're not really sure until they start placing the call to Moonbase Alpha that you're watching Space 1999. So I thought it was a trick opening at the same time, but brilliant at the same time, right? I mean, it was a stylistic choice, but it works very well.
I'd like to one comment I want to make about that too is there is actually a deleted scene that took place that they I'm not sure when I say deleted scene, it was in the script, the original shooting script, but they chose not to go with it. As you recall, to your point, I mean, it starts off with the conversation between the two of them, and they're seeing the moon on the monitor, which is kind of cool. And then they have the conversation, and then Cabot Rolland realized, it is the moon after Jack has, informed him about, looking at it closely, and then he magnifies it, and then he recalls Moonbase Alpha being out there, and he's thinking, Earthmen from home. And when he reaches out to contact them, switching over to the next scene is when the main mission doorways open up, and then what's happening is Koenig, Paul, and I believe Kano are coming out. The scene that was actually deleted actually was a scene with them in the commander's office, which was where the three of them would have been, and they're discussing the readings on the planet, which they have named the ice planet. And the planet is actually referenced as being the ice planet a little bit later on in the episode when they're having a discussion. So Sandra notifies them that they're picking up a signal from the planet, and then from the ice planet, and then what happens is the doors open, and then that's when they come out. But that whole sequence was deleted. There was also some mention about their trajectory changing because of the gravitational forces, and I think it would have been it wasn't going to affect them directly, that they would pass it. And however, there was some kind of interference that was coming from them because of the gravity pull. And then even later in the episode, when Koenig is with Cabot Rolland and Alan is making his way back to the base because they're trying to find him, Koenig references that they're only going to be within range of the planet for 4 more days. So they need to, contact Alpha to know that they're alive. I believe it was either 5 or 7 days when the conversation was going on in the office. So it's cool to find out about these deleted scenes that could have been, because it gives that added touch. But unfortunately, because of time or whatever the specific situation, it didn't make it to the final print. But wanted to share with everybody.
That's nice to know.
I'd never heard that before, Roy, either, and I'm in this instance, I'm really glad it was cut, because to circle back to that opening and stylistically, it really caught me upon second viewing later in the 80s. Like I was very young when the series first aired, and I have very few recollections. I remember the episodes in general, but these little moments. But so when I saw it again for the first time in the 80s, it was actually, so our CBC network up in Canada reran it probably in 86, 87, and the very first episode aired was Deaths of the Dominion. So that trick opening, right? I knew it right away, but I'd forgotten about how the Elfins and Koenig are introduced with the main mission doors opening, and it just hit me, and it just like it sent shivers down my spine to see that again for the first time. So I'm a big fan of that opening and the way everything is introduced as is.
I think they still would have had that trick opening, but I think what would have happened is when they were trying to reach out to Alpha, then it would have switched over to where they would be showing them in the office. So it's just that it wouldn't have been as dramatic with,
It was
the main mission doors opening, but it would have been the opening where it would have started with Roland and Tanner. But I understand what you're saying. And again, that gives more of a powerful moment because, with the doors unveiling, it's just like, whoa, you know what I mean? It's not even like it just switches to dialogue. It's just like the doors are opening and then here they come. And then they're, into that moment. So totally get it. Like you said, you're a couple of years younger than I am. And I remember seeing this for the very first time and thinking, oh, this is kind of interesting because it wasn't taking place immediately on Moonbase Alpha. And I think the first time I saw this episode, if I recall, was at my grandparents' house in New York, in Queens, in Astoria, Queens. And as far as seeing it, and I just have that recollection to your point about the opening.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Jeff, what about yourself? Anything in particular that sticks in your mind about seeing it for the very first time?
Well, of course, there's always the ending. I think that shocked everybody.
Of course. It was one of those famous year one episodes that was just incredible that they got this stuff on, well, it wasn't network TV, but and because of that, I mean, so much got past the censors that never would have made it had they had that network sale. Like so much horrifying and horrific imagery, and that ending is just like, yeah, it's ingrained in your brain from a very early age.
Yeah, and figuring, as we mentioned earlier, figuring out the entire Jack Tanner character. Who is this guy? Why is he acting this way? What's wrong? And then you find out his backstory and that he has lucid moments. I think the entire character was very intriguing. And, when you were talking about the opening too, I think that's the only episode in the series where the action didn't start directly on Alpha, started somewhere else. So
right. I can't think of another example of
There's
that.
only one other episode that I could say that actually the action did not start off on Moonbase Alpha. I mean, in fact, it's a trivia question I've thrown out there in the past. The only episode that doesn't take place on Moonbase Alpha, we see the moon, but we don't see actually the base, is this year 2 episode, All That Glisters. What happens is we see the Eagle, coming, Helen is doing her space, her status report, and they're in the Survey Eagle and they're heading for the planet to find Milganite. But that's to your point, Jeff, really, as far as any other episodes, I 100% agree with you that there is no.
We have the off the moon dialogue first, and
yeah.
So I think those are the things that stood out the most. I thought the interior set was really quite elaborate too. For some of the, as you go through the series, you see a number of the sets repurposed, and I thought that was just an intriguing design. They really came up with, I think, a good overall plan on presenting that.
I agree, and the example here is I referenced Full Circle earlier, and the ice cave is actually repurposed as the interior of the cave on Retha in the very next episode.
Yeah, and it was done very, very well.
I liked, you know what, and this episode has really grown on me. It wasn't one of my favorites as a child either, but I will say that later in life, and in particular with the remasters and the high definition versions that have come out, Death Star the Dominion really, um, really visually pops, because a lot of the episodes, like, and one of the critiques of the series is that the sets combined with the uniforms, everything is very muted. Like, there's not a lot of contrast visually, and I just find, especially in HD, everything in this episode, from the stark white snow to uh, blue uniforms that they're wearing, to the fire in the middle of the cave with the orange glow. It's just very visually. There's a lot of additional contrast that you don't see in other episodes.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you about that, Warren. And it was kind of cool to see these uniforms on them, and it's a one-off. I think there was discussion originally in the script, earlier scripts, of potentially having them wear their spacesuits because of the conditions on the ice planet, but they, Ultima Thule, which then they decided to go with, the snow uniforms. One of the things, though, is a lot of interesting references to Ultima Thule, the name of the planet. That actually has a significance. And looking that up, and it's a reference to a distant unknown region, the extreme limit of travel and discovery. I thought that was pretty interesting and very appropriate.
I've always liked the name of the planet, and
Yeah.
I've wanted to use it in my own writing, but I don't know. I'm too chicken to kind of borrow too heavily from one of my favorite series, but still.
It's also, Roy, you'll probably know this, it's also referenced in Star Trek, or it was referenced years later.
Oh, okay.
You didn't know
You
that?
can find it in the star chart, actually.
It was actually in a year one episode of Deep Space Nine, and Kira Nerys, they're talking about a snow world, and Kira Nerys says Ultima Thule. She doesn't say Thule. She said, I'm getting readings from Ultima Thule.
I'll be upfront with you, Warren. When it comes to Star Trek, you can ask me anything about Star Trek, the original series, and not 99.9% I'll know it. And if I didn't, I'll come clean on it. When it comes to Next Generation, I've definitely watched all of them, but after that, I fall right off.
I'm just very happy that I got you with a trivia question, because you're normally the master of giving them, but
nah, I've got my limits. But that's very cool to hear, though. It's nice to hear that was referenced in Deep Space Nine, though. That's very, very cool.
Yeah, I think I saw it in a because they had like a Star Trek Star Charts book that was released by I think Pocket Books, I think in the mid 2000s. Mm-hmm. I still have it today, and I think there's a reference to that specific location in the star chart, and I thought that's a funny, cute little Easter egg.
Well, and I'll carry on with that same thought, Phil. That Star Trek Star Maps book was released by Jeffrey Mandel, who actually did the original Eagle blueprints back in the old Starlog magazine, number 7, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and Jeff was a big fan of 1999, of course, but also Star Trek. And if you look at that book closely, Roy and I just actually in the last couple of years got in contact with Mr. Mandel, and I've always wanted to ask him a question, because if you pull out that book, there's, as you're flipping the pages, he uses a particular background, like just for just to fill space on some of the pages. Like, he's got very interesting articles and photos and things like that, and maps and charts that he's drawn. But you'll notice in the background, and he uses it on multiple pages, there's a particular design that's very familiar to Space 1999 fans. It's actually a graphic of the Alpha Base, the circular with you can see the travel tubes and the buildings, and it's not a close facsimile. It's the actual Moonbase Alpha graphic, and he used it in his Star Trek Star Maps book. So
you gotta hunt it down now.
Crazy.
And a couple little trivia things too from this episode. I recall something where they actually mention meta at one point in there. There's one one very quick comment, and it's like meta. So have to go back and double check that. And of course,
I missed that. That's really cool, Jeff, to hear that. I totally missed that.
And yeah, if I can find it, I'll send you guys a time hack on it.
Please.
Sure.
The other thing is the presence of one of the background actresses, Glenda Allen.
Mm-hmm.
She's sitting there with Alan Carter at one point, and then right next to Jack at the end. And I think she holds the title of having played the most different roles in Space 1999. So a lot of them in year two.
I think you're right, because I'm trying to remember. She was a number in One Moment of Humanity.
She was an Alpha in Command Center. She was a nurse in several. In fact, in Collision Course, we saw her. She was one of the three. It was Bob Mathias, Glenda Allen portraying a nurse, and then there was another woman that was a nurse that are actually transferring Alan from the gurney to the bed, and they're actually trying to get his spacesuit off. So yes, and she is actually somebody I attempted to track down a little bit with the help of a mutual friend, which is Suzanne Heimer Peterson, who actually was Barbara Bain's stand-in on the series, and because I think she would be a fantastic person to discuss about Space 1999. Anybody with the show would obviously be, but to your point, Jeff, she had so many different roles, and especially as a Thulian in this episode too. I mean, Alan goes right over to her and puts his arm around her, and he's saying about they would be crazy to not want to be on that planet.
Yeah, Alan's such a ladies' guy.
Yeah, there's Valerie Leon, who was in the James Bond film The Spy Who Loved Me, and speaking and facing Anton Phillips there in that photo.
Yeah,
I actually had the opportunity to meet her at a convention, which is called Chiller Theater Convention. It was back in 2012, and she was very, very nice.
Excellent.
I just want to pull this up, guys. It's just even within the Eagle cockpit, those blue uniforms just are, they just really pop so nicely with the blue and the red trim, and yeah. Because the only other thing you'd see is the normal Elfin uniform, which is very muted, like I said, or the orange of a spacesuit. And there's so much orange in the cockpit as it is, it all sort of blends together.
Yeah.
But so listen, fellas, we're about halfway through our discussion here, and we'd like to ask you both to share your story, your history for a couple of minutes each on how you got involved with Space 1999 and how far back you go and things like that. So we'll start with Jeff. We'll open it up. How did you hear about the series, see about it, or get involved?
Well, we were talking just briefly before the show started here. And I was a big fan of UFO, of course, the predecessor series. Really enjoyed it. In fact, made a trip over to London in September of '73 to try and talk to some of the UFO cast. And I managed to have meetings with Antonia Ellis, who played Moonbase operative Joan Harrington, with Andrea Allen, who had a couple roles. She was a Moonbase operative in some of the later episodes, and probably her most notable role was the nurse who kept talking to the Strakers in the episode Question of Priorities, reporting on the condition of Commander Straker's son. Had the opportunity to get together with Gabriella Drake. Just a wonderful person, so nice, so sweet. And actually got invited over to Vladek Shabal's house for lunch. Vladek, of course, played Dr. Jackson.
Sure.
And while I was there, we got to talking about things, and he mentioned that the Andersons were coming up with another series, and they had just signed these two American actresses from that Mission Impossible series. So here we are, September '73, 2 years before the show comes out. And it's like, well, tell me more about it. He didn't have a lot of information. So, of course, after 2 years of waiting, we finally got to see the show, and loved it from literally the beginning. First episode, first piece of music, everything. It was fantastic. And I remember even having a Space 1999 party for a bunch of folks that were sci-fi people to come over and sit down and watch the episode. So enjoyed every episode. Of course, season 2 was a bit of a shock when it came on. The changes. Now, I generally prefer the tone, the music, the atmosphere of season 1, but I take a lot of enjoyment in a lot of the season 2 episodes as well. So not really, anti either season, if you will.
Sure.
When the show came to an end, we, a bunch of us got together through various means to try and see what we could do to A, save the show, and B, talk about a convention. We organized ourselves, and we found each other through Starlog magazine and a variety of personal contacts. We couldn't use the Space 1999 name at that point in time. So we called ourselves a group with Save 1999. And since we were national and since we wanted to portray ourselves as being a little bit bigger than we actually were, we became the National Save 1999 Alliance. Kind of a dumb name, but hey, it worked. That group ended up pulling together, and this is probably a story for another time, but pulled together the first Space 1999 convention back in 1978 in Columbus. Literally, it was the first convention any of us had tried to put together, and it was a miracle that it fell in place the way it did. And it was an outstanding experience. The actors were amazing to work with. We took them down to Children's Hospital, and they visited the kids there. They actually donated all of their speaking fees to Children's Hospital, in addition to what the convention was donating. So these guys came, from England, from California to Columbus, and they were just amazing. So stayed involved with the conventions for a few more years. I've always followed the show, always loved the show. And of course, now that we're coming up to the 50th anniversary, it's just incredible to see that the show still has the following that it does, and that it's still, you can watch it over and over and over again and thoroughly enjoy it. So
wow. What a fascinating and amazing history there, Jeff. And Roy and I have already said that we'd love to have you on, maybe in a future show, a special episode where we talk specifically about the conventions over the years, and in particular your involvement with the very, very first gathering of Space 1999 fans. What a momentous occasion! And I just want to bring up for a second here. There was a document that I discovered in the archives and history from Martin Landau, and this document actually from the archives mentions your name and the fact that you were organizing the very first convention, and this is presumably from a secretary of some kind, but to Martin saying this is happening and they've invited you and they'd love to have you as a very special guest. But how about that, a document from all those years ago that was remained hidden until we unearthed it here in the last year, and just wow, what an incredible achievement for the time, and 50 years later, and there's been many people in the interim, but Roy and I are just so thrilled and honored to be sort of carrying that mantle from these last few years and keep the spirit alive.
Well, I appreciate that. And one correction, I actually have seen that letter before. It's signed by Mona Dolitsky, and Mona was one of our convention committee.
Okay.
The first convention.
Oh, yes. It's his assistant. Yeah. Jeff Jones. Yeah.
And
there we go.
Yeah. Mona was an invaluable help in getting all this together for the first convention. It's kind of interesting when you look at it. A number of us, well, at least Mona and I, went into the NASA spaceflight area.
Yeah.
Mine wasn't because of the series, oddly enough. I was always kind of slow in figuring out that's what I should be doing. Finally figured it out shortly after the first convention. But Mona, she went off to the NASA Jet Propulsion Lab
Okay.
and had a career there.
Amazing. Wow.
I bounced around at 7 of the different centers plus headquarters during my career with the agency. But yeah, there's been a lot of influence from this series on fans over the years.
Well, and your own history with NASA. In case we haven't touched on this for the viewers out there, so you basically worked for NASA for close to 25 years.
Yes, I spent 6 years in the space shuttle program, 10 years in the space station program. Worked on the X-37 orbital vehicle as the chief engineer, which is now the Air Force's secret space plane you hear about all the time that they launched. It stays up there for 2 or 3 years. Worked on the Maven Mars mission, the Orion crew capsule, and
Wow.
several other things. So it was, space is just, it's hard to compare any other career as to the opportunities that something like NASA or now SpaceX Blue Origin that they provide in this area.
Wonderful accomplishments, Jeff. Amazing.
Yeah.
And I will point out that by just pure happenstance, I ended up with my graduate school college advisor was my own personal version of Ernst Queller.
Oh, wow.
He's a German rocket scientist who named Rudolf Etze, and he's the one who first proposed using liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen as a rocket propellant.
Oh my goodness.
So
that's amazing.
Wow. Well, we'll definitely have to have you back on. There's a lot of history here, Jeff, and we'd love to have you even as a convention guest this September in Los Angeles if you can make it. And Phil, yourself, you're right in San Diego, right?
Yes, I moved here just for the MFA in creative writing program, and eventually I'm going to pursue a doctorate of education since that's part of my passion. My ideal goal in life is to basically be an educator by day and then a filmmaker / novelist at night.
Nice.
But we'll see how all that shakes out. But yeah, that's me.
Wow. So how did you get into the series or discover the series? I think you mentioned something about your dad was showing you a plethora of science fiction in the 70s, right?
Yeah, my dad was very influential over my interest in science fiction. I think I kind of he was more interested in like television and movies, and then I kind of discovered books and started reading stuff, Asimov stuff, Bradbury's things, and work by Clark Heinlein, and so that kind of took me off onto a completely different tangent than whatever he was doing. But how I found Space 1999, I think, is kind of interesting, and it gets back to Battlestar Galactica ultimately because I think the Sci-Fi Channel when it first premiered in 1993 had a 15-year anniversary for Battlestar Galactica, and it was hosted by Dirk Benedict. And I guess I don't know exactly how or why it happened, but they were showing commercials for things that they were going to show as part of their syndication lineup, and one of those shows was Space 1999. That was the first time I had ever seen anything associated with Space 1999, and it piqued my interest, but I never really brought it up to my dad. My dad was the one who actually volunteered it to me years later. But ultimately, I think what he had showed me was a thing he had recorded on a VHS tape, maybe a little bit around the same time, but it wasn't like an actual episode. It was a. I think I know now it's called Alien Attack. So it's basically Breakaway and War Games edited together.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that was my first experience with the show. And so for whatever reason, I felt like whatever this show was, even though it was a little older, and I'm watching this maybe in like 2000, 2001, and I'm like, this thing mesmerized me for whatever reason. And I was like, you know what, I want to eventually create a sci-fi show that does the same exact thing that this show does, because unlike any other sci-fi show I've ever seen in my life, even better than Star Trek, I would say, this is a sacrilege to some, Star Trek doesn't do the unknown quite like Space 1999. There's, I don't know, like a interesting aura that the show has that I want to capture in my own writing, where you're actually out there confronting the unknown and it's always coming in like bizarre forms, shapes, or things that are constantly trying to harm you and like create some kind of hostility towards you. And I don't know, I just haven't found a show that quite does the same thing even to this day. And I think that's why the show sticks with me and like has its like talons in me sort of thing. But yeah, right after that, my dad, because this is around the time that A&E started selling Space 1999 DVDs in like little boxed sets. And so my dad would like, I think once a month buy one, and then I would like burn through all the episodes. And then before I knew it, we were all through all the however many sets that there were at the time. I still have them. And yeah, I was like completely enamored by it. And I'm like, wow, at the same time I'm watching reruns of stuff that happened in the 90s that I wasn't really familiar with. Earth 2, Space Above Beyond. I did grow up with Star Trek Voyager being like my first show I saw live. Star Trek Enterprise was the first show I saw from beginning to end. But around this time, those things are airing, but I'm rediscovering Space 1999, or discovering it for me for the first time. And I don't know, I get taken by it. And even to this day, I went out and bought, the Carter style. That's what they say on the Jerry Anderson store, the style. And I bought the Koenig style, Moonbase Alpha uniform. And I've been collecting all kinds of things from Space 1999. I've even reached out to Jeffrey Morris, who's doing the documentary, and we've had a discussion. He's even told me some things like what he wants to do with the franchise if he had ever gotten his whole hands on it, and I'm really excited if he was to lead the franchise into the future. I don't know. I think, and then having my own podcast and talking about it and kind of relating it to my journey through science fiction and pretty much the entire gamut of my writing process and journey. Yeah, I think it's inextricable, and that's how special the show is to me ultimately, because it's always been there.
Well, it's very interesting. You mentioned the aura and mystery surrounding presumably year one. So I thought of a quote right away. Rory's probably right there with me. The line between science and mysticism is just a line, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just as a random thought, as you were burning through those DVDs in the early 2000s, those sets came out every 3 or 4 months. I remember buying them all. What happened when you got to year two?
Well, I noticed that there was a sharp uptick in action, and they were now no longer in main mission. They were in some kind of other thing. And I noticed this other guy, Tony, and I'm like, oh, he seems kind of cool. What is he about? And there's like this running gag of I guess he's trying to do microbrewing, and it's like, I think that's kind of funny. But I think season 2 isn't without its rewards, if you will. One of my favorite episodes of the season is Bringers of Wonder, the 2-parter, and I even think Brian the Brain is pretty good. So there's some things to pull from. I mean Maya too, so I can't forget that. But I'm more of a season 1 guy in the sense that I feel like it's the most grounded between the two. But no, I'll watch both of them, without any hesitation, of course.
I want to go back. I really enjoyed hearing your comparison. Not to go with comparisons, but I've never actually heard Star Trek and Space 1999 compared in such a that was a very mature statement that you made about it, and it's really true what you said. And immediately comes to my mind is I think of Dragon's Domain, because in regards to Star Trek never really doing anything like that. I mean, they've made references to different things on different worlds, but it's just it was never depicted in that type of way. Obviously, the shows are 2 different types of shows, 2 different series, especially when considering year one and Star Trek, that was aired between 1966 and 1969. It kills me to say the original series, and because to me, Star Trek is Star Trek, but now there's so many incarnations. But when I think of Star Trek, I'm thinking back in the 60s. I mean, that's what I grew up with in the 70s. Yeah. But no, we really appreciate you sharing your thoughts about that and the influence that it has had on you. I remember when being super excited about Space 1999 coming to the Sci-Fi Channel, because sadly, after Space 1999 did its run in the late 70s, I mean, even Starlog magazine was, I remember it was Jerry Anderson's Space Report, which, again, referencing David Hirsch, our friend David Hirsch, had, even commented about what was going to happen, that it was going to wind down. 1999, unfortunately, only had 48 episodes. And from a syndication package deal with the different independent net stations, it really it made it tough, because essentially you're cycling through, especially if you're showing it Monday through Friday, it's within maybe like within 2 months, 60 days, less than 60 days, a month and a half, you're actually going to go cycle through it. That's why with Star Trek, I mean, having the 78, 79 episodes, it was constantly being run in syndication, and that's what pretty much propelled it to the status it did in 1972, 73 when it was being shown. But unfortunately for 1999, it was almost like it was going to be off, and it was like a warning. So it was a very sad time, because it was like you could not find it anywhere. Going from like 79 or so to into the 80s, I think Channel 11 WPIX out of New York, they did something, and we've talked about this on the show before, where they did a special 2-hour presentation of where they took Bringers of Wonder Part 1 and Part 2, put it together. It was not Destination Moonbase Alpha, but it was just the 2 episodes. And to your point, the Alien Attack, they were released on video, which David Hirsch had compiled, and that was the only way really to get Space 1999. It's like if you happen to find these videotapes at the stores with the altered music, the altered episodes, these scenes that had been inserted, it was like you could enjoy Breakaway and War Games and the Metamorph and Space Warp, which was the Cosmic Princess, and also Alien Attack, and then Destination Moonbase Alpha, as well as the Black Sun and Collision Course, and then you also had Sybil Danning to go along with it, doing the narrative. But then, fortunately, A&E, when the 2000s came along and started doing that release, it was like, oh, this is cool, because there was that access. And then, of course, there was, not if you had access to somebody that had the videos. And Jeff, I referenced Lou Place. He was instrumental for me, because he actually had taped the shows, and I was, he was sending me these copies, and it was wonderful to see. And then, of course, the stations that he had broadcast them on, or actually recorded off the broadcast, had not cut certain scenes that the local stations had cut in my area. So it's like I was seeing this footage that I never saw before, because unfortunately, even though it was syndicated, Channel 11, Channel 17 out of Philly was snipping away, and then, you don't get the complete story. But
well, I think the interesting thing about Alien Attack, rediscovering it when I watched the actual DVDs, was that I was half because there's scenes in Alien Attack that are shot strictly for Alien Attack, and that's the Lunar Space Commission scenes.
Yep.
And so when I was watching Breakaway, when I got old enough, I was like, where did those scenes go? I know I didn't imagine them. I know they're here. And no, those are just specifically for that. And so, it was kind of weird to experiencing that sort of disparity, but
the one actor that they utilized for that, and I don't know his name, and I apologize for that, but he actually did the voice. You would hear his voice in the Beta Cloud. He was yeah, that was, and I don't recall the actor's name, but he was actually in that conference on Earth. So,
futility, Mr. Verdershi.
An exercise in futility.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'll second what Roy said about Philip's analysis, and I remember back in the Space 1999 first season, when it was actually being run first time around, the Star Trek fans went after it, because it wasn't Star Trek, and the two things that they brought up again and again and again were, one is not Star Trek, and two, it has those downer endings, and we hate those downer endings. Now, the odd thing about that is probably the most popular Star Trek episode of all time, City on the Edge of Forever, has that downer ending.
Yep.
And we would have to point out to them, hey, you guys are out there because you want to be out there. Yep. You're on the Enterprise, you're serving, you got all the comforts of home, everything you need. Space 1999 doesn't. They're out there trying to survive. It's a totally different concept. You're in an area that you never thought you'd be in. You never signed up to go to, and it was like a lot of the fans back then on the Star Trek side couldn't grasp that. So that was the rub between the series. And I think Philip, what you said is a very good description of that interrelationship between the two groups.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like I think that's why I gravitated towards Star Trek Voyager, because they're like out there, on their own without any,
Yes,
assistance from the Federation. And then Stargate Universe did kind of the same thing, but a little different. But ultimately, those two shows, I mean, I never felt like Voyager was ever in danger of anything like losing, because there were always a holodeck episode. There was always like, oh, we can just go do this thing. We'll be okay. And I'm like, okay. I mean, I do wonder how the show would have gone had there been more of that sort of sense of, danger or hostilities and, around every corner. I really did feel like that in Space 1999. I mean, I want to see a show like that. Hopefully I can make one. We'll see. But yeah, either way, it's like this show still is the only one that I feel like has done it to a level that hasn't been replicated.
Well, there's the mystique of Space 1999. It's something we've talked about on previous episodes, and one of the ones that really resonates is Force of Life. I mean, the ending of Force of Life, it's an open-ended episode. I mean, there is no answer of why that energy force came to Alpha. There's no reason why it did what it did. It came, it was there, and it went. And fortunately, they made it through. And Eva asks the questions to Helena. It's why, and it's just, and they don't know. It was really brilliant for 1999 to do that. And even with this is sort of open ended in the sense that it asks the question. I mean, it's just that shows wouldn't do that. I mean, there almost had to be that wrap up. So
we talked about this. TV at the time was very formulaic, very episodic, right? And as Jeff said, those happy endings, with the whole bridge crew sitting around laughing and making a joke about Mr. Spock, and they went for that in year 2 of 1999, and look what happened.
Right.
At the same time, right?
But Space 1999 had its own personality, and
it did. Yeah.
And I mean, we'll save this for our discussion because we can really go down that road. But I mean, Martin Landau was even quoted of even saying it in a Starlog magazine interview. It's just that it was getting
it had a look, a style, and a feel all their own.
Yeah, but unfortunately, then there's also the question that that comes up, that if they didn't make the changes, if they didn't do it, it would have been boom. It would have been done. Year 1 would have been it. And then that would have been it. We would have had the 24 episodes and that's it. And I mean, I too, just to let, Jeff and Phil know, and Warren definitely, chime in with this. I mean, I definitely enjoy the year 2 episodes. I favor year 1, but there are a great many year 2 episodes that I enjoy, especially towards the latter part of the season. There's a few in the beginning. I mean, Journey to Where is a favorite. The Metamorph is a favorite. Even the Exiles to a point. But it's I'm not a fan of the Tabor. I mean, it's like, you know what I mean? It's like, it's just, not. And again, we're gonna get into this when we talk about these later on. But I'm interested, Phil. I would love to talk to you about Brian the Brain. I mean,
I was just going to say, I have to learn to watch what I say, because
I'll be honest with you. I'm not a big fan of that episode. I could see that but that's okay though. And I'd be very interested for, a discussion down the road. In fact, we're going to be doing year 2. I'm maybe inviting you on prematurely right now, but if you want to come back, I think you'd be a great guest to have for our discussion of Brian the Brain, because it's a show that you enjoy. So I would think it would be very interesting to get into that, you know what I mean? Have that open discussion about it.
I guess very, very briefly, I think I can say that there's just something about like the Brian the Brain character that kind of fascinates me. But beyond that, even there's just like little touches of like world building that we don't really get. Like it's not really overdone or anything, but from Lee Russell's expedition to this episode, to,
and the
that
Phoenix
Star
and
Mission 96
Yeah.
yeah,
and the Metaprobe. Like, I'm
the Ultra
fascinated by
Pro.
what the world is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly. There were
the
so
Ultra.
many failed missions
Yeah.
within the
Yeah,
1999 universe. That's a really fascinating point to touch on. Is that Brian the
yeah,
Brain sort of carried on that tradition?
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it stirs my imagination, and I think at that aspect of it, whatever the stuff on Earth or on the Moon or whatever, they even reference like a Mars satellite in Breakaway. So it's like,
Yeah.
what is the situation in the solar system? And I'm like, I've been doing my best since I was a kid of like creating an alternate timeline. That's like where most of my fiction stories are set. And I think that's where the influence from Space 1999 gets, comes in. But, I've been reading some stuff that, has come out recently with, well, not recently, but they did a Space 1999 comic or graphic novel called Aftershock, which was very interesting because it tries to bridge the gap between our reality and the world of Space 1999. And then the Space 1999 technical operations manual has come out, and I definitely jumped on that when I got it. There's an RPG thing coming out. I think it's already out. I haven't gotten it yet, but I definitely want to get that. And no, it's just like the world of Space 1999, I think, is a lot more than people say it is. And I think I would love to kind of feel that all fleshed out a bit more. Because I actually think, I disagree with some people who say that we should just remake it all together. I think with shows like For All Mankind, where they're set in an alternate timeline, Space 1999 can still exist without having to do any changes practically. And we would just kind of update some effects and little things like that. But it wouldn't necessarily be a continuation. We could do something different with it. But I'm kind of the opinion that we can basically keep it as is and not do anything, and then it'll be fine. But
And
maybe we can just play up some elements.
I would agree with that because I think one of the show's strengths is that the members of Moonbase Alpha are contemporaries of ours.
Mhm.
They're not 300 years in the future where we've been exploring the galaxy and have a pretty decent idea what's out there. They don't know anything that's out there, and they're a lot like us. So, uh, and Roy, just to piggyback on what you're saying about year two, I like the number of year two episodes. I do tend to lean towards the later ones as well, even though there's some up front that I love. What drives me maybe crazy is like one episode that I like is Devil's Planet. I love the dialogue in there. I love the a lot of the just the action in there. But it drives me crazy. The last scene after Elysia passes away, Coney just strolls off through the dead bodies with all this happy music. It's like
Yeah. Yeah. No,
that's where I think part of the problem was.
well, so well said, Jeff. And it's interesting too, because you know what? It's funny when that episode was on when I was younger. I would like, oh, not this episode, because I remember the first time seeing it, and I didn't know at the time that it was what they considered a double up episode, because they were shooting two episodes, at the same time simultaneously, and borrowing members of the cast from one, for one episode, and then minimizing on the other, and vice versa. But as I got older, that episode really grew on me, and I had more of an adult appreciation for it. But I totally agree with you. It's like the ending could have been so much better. I mean, even when he looks up, he sees the eagle and everything. Even up until that point, and he looks down at Elysia and he shakes his head. Up until that point, it's appropriate, but it's just like you said, it's just like nonchalant, and it's like on to the next thing, and it is kind of like a letdown. But I mean, it's very adult. It's very dealing with different issues within society, and what was happening on the colony, and what she was trying to do, and then how the Alphans were reacting to everything. And it definitely worked. Although I never I always had a question that Blake Maine knew how to fly an eagle, even though he was
I, and it's funny. I just watched Devil's Planet on Christmas Day. I had the urge to watch it. I think I told you, Roy. And the other thing I noticed about Devil's Planet that I hadn't really before is that I love the Great Hall that they're on.
Yeah.
It's the one of the few instances in year two where they open things up, on the level of a Gwent interior,
Yes.
or even the ice cavern in Death's Other Dominion, right? I
Yeah.
mean, those wonderful sets, and that was because, and you can even tell, like the dialogue is all there's this nice echo effect when they're
Yeah.
speaking in that great temple, and I love the episode for that alone.
Plus, I thought it was really cool too. I mean, with the eagle, I mean, you think Konig's going to get the better of her. When you get to see the laser gun. I mean, prepare and everything, and then he gets thwarted on that. But it had its action, it had its characterization, the story, everything with Elysia, and then there's the connection to Death's Other Dominion. People say, why are you talking about that? In regards to Brian Blessed. Brian Blessed had married Hildegard Neal in
Oh yeah.
1958. They were married, and sadly, she just passed away. They were married for 45 years. Sadly, she died in 2023. But they were together for a very long time.
Yeah. No, listen, fellas. 1999 at its worst, I would still take in a heartbeat over a lot of other 70s science fiction,
Right.
and we talked about Buck Rogers. And Buck Rogers was what, 3 or 4 years after year two. I just
1979. Yeah.
Yeah, it
yeah.
was 79 to 81.
There's
Yeah.
just no comparison. That 1999 at its worst was still infinitely superior in my mind to a lot of science fiction at the time.
Galactica 1980.
Yeah.
Yes.
Don't go there.
Well, I think that there's only one episode of Galactica 1980 that's worth saving, and that's the Return of Starbuck.
Return of Starbuck.
Agreed. Yeah, Glenn Larson series unfortunately seemed to have that path. Oddly enough, our convention group had a connection with Glenn Larson. We had contact Susie, the secretary, who was Glenn Larson's secretary, and we would reach out to her periodically, and she'd send us stuff for the auctions we had back at the early conventions.
Nice.
And a couple of us from that were working the 80 convention were out in California for the 1980 Rose Bowl, and we had a tour of Universal Studios as part of that tour. We dropped off the tour and went over to Larson's office and met Susie, and we're talking to her, and she goes, "Oh, by the way, they're filming Buck Rogers back on the lot there. You want to go back on the set for a while?"
Oh, wow.
So we did, and it was the episode where they create Princess Ardala creates zygotes, copies of Buck, and we watched a couple series, a couple scenes be filmed, and then noticed that there was this woman off to the side that kept kind of flirting with Buck, with Gil Gerard. So wandered over there, started talking to her, and mentioned, we're out here for the Rose Bowl from Ohio State, and we're going to have a convention in summer of 1980 in Columbus, Space 1999. We'd love to have Gil attend, if possible. And she goes, "Oh, well, I'm Connie Selica, Gil's wife."
Oh my God.
And so she called him over, and we talked to him, and he said, "Yeah, depending on my schedule, I'd certainly be interested." Well, that year they had the writers' strike, and Gil said, "Well, I'm not going to be working, so yeah, I'd love to be there." They settled it just slightly before the convention started, so he had to cancel. But I don't know if anyone remembers that was at that convention, but he did like a 2-hour radio interview at the convention because of that. But so that's the tie back to that, and plus the fact we had Herb Jefferson Jr., Boomer from the original Galactic series, as one of our guests too. So
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I've met him a handful of times. He's great.
he's a great guy.
Very down to earth. He was also at Chiller Theater in New Jersey, and that's wow. That's
One,
really cool.
can't remember the actress name. Wilma Deering, of course.
Erin Gray.
Aaron Gray.
Erin Gray, went on to actually, she's one of the main facilitators of celebrity guests for all of the Comic Cons and fan expos nowadays. She runs one of the two major appearance firms, if you will.
Wow.
Very accomplished. Yeah, that's amazing. Wonderful.
Jeff, you'd mentioned something about how 1999 didn't really influence your career at NASA, but if I could go out on a limb here, because one of the things that we've talked about in previous episodes, and even just between Roy and myself, is just been the fact that as a kid in the 1970s watching science fiction, it was, and as you stated, it wasn't 300 years in the future. It was, you could almost reach out and touch it 25 years down the road, right? And the other thing I want to relate to that is just quite simply look at the background behind Jeff. That Moonbase Alpha interior for me still stands the test of time as one of the most realistic, if you will, interior designs of any spaceship, any base or anywhere in existence. And the work that Keith Wilson did on coming up with that look and aesthetic, I think to this day is a true testament to the longevity of the series. It inspired so many people who were my age at the time to continue a lifelong passion in all things science fiction.
Yeah, no, I agree. I want to kind of take the aesthetic and borrow it for my own stuff, but
Yeah.
I don't know if I'll actually be able to get away with that. We'll see.
Yeah, it was so smart with modular design, so that they could quickly put up and erect sets and tear them down in a hurry, right? And make them each and every one look different too. That's another reason why stylistically and aesthetically, I think year one is a little more appealing, because year two was sort of had that canned look. There was really only the standing sets. They didn't really change things up all that much.
Well, I think it was brilliant on Keith Wilson's part, because I mean, he was doing it for logistical purposes. He was doing it for financial purposes.
Yeah.
But also the fact is, to your point, it really resonated. It felt to me, specifically with year one, and maybe part of it is I was tainted with year two, because in the Making of Space 1999, which was so cool, there was, again, in Tim Held's book, I'm giving the plug there. You had the diagram, the layout of the sets for year two, because they had it as everything was a standing set. But in my mind, anytime they're in one area of the base, in my mind, I was referencing, I know where they're at. I can picture that soundstage and where they're going to, and I know that they're not going to go beyond a certain point, or if they do, it's going to cut over, and then what they're going to do is they're going to film it from a different angle, and they're going to just do the camera techniques.
Yeah.
However, for year one, really the only standing set was Main Mission and the Eagle, and then we've seen Medical Center, or being different types of incarnations as it evolved through the series. But still, when you would see it, though, it just felt so vast. The Main Mission set was incredible. It really just felt like an operational moon base, especially in Breakaway. Breakaway just seemed so vast, and maybe just the way they did the different angles and what have you. It just really felt like, to me, it was like an operational moon base.
Yeah, and I just recently watched your Force of Life podcast, and the nuclear generation set was just incredible.
Beautiful.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
When they opened that door, the first time I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That is just amazing.
Yeah. How they did all this on a television budget in 1973, 74. It's just truly remarkable.
And it was cool too, because they got to reuse that just for one scene, or two scenes rather, and because it was production order back to back with Alpha Child. So they actually got to utilize it again, which actually added to the continuity of the series, where, okay, we're in this area again and we're getting to see it, which was kind of cool. And then unfortunately after that, it just kind of like dropped off. But
yeah. Now, did they use that same door in Beta Cloud, or?
I think the double door was repurposed in year two. And as Roy was saying, there's the one technical section at the end of the corridor that you always knew when the camera would turn the corner, you'd see the double doors. I think that was the red door.
I think, Jeff, are you referring to the nuclear generating? Yeah.
Or the big swinging door.
I think that was the same one.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
And that was a standing set too, that they actually had. For year two. I mean, we saw it in, I think we definitely see it in One Moment of Humanity, and obviously the Beta Cloud.
But considering that's the same door, and here's another nod to year one, and who directed Force of Life? Was it Ray Austin?
No, David Tomlin was the director.
Tomlin with that really unique cinematography. But the way he shot that door opening, he made it look a lot bigger than what it was. Because when you see it in year two, it's the same door,
right?
But it's just again just camera.
When Zarf is trying to open the door, I mean, he's really pulling on it, and the weight and everything. I mean, it was just brilliant direction. And with this episode too, going back to Charles Crichton. I mean, his direction. I mean, he directed so many of the Space 1999 episodes, and again, it comes through with this episode as well. It's the Ice Planet.
Yep. Just very well done.
Oh, and Barry.
I know, such a gentleman.
Yeah, I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to meet him at the 1999 convention and in LA, and then also the Main Mission convention in 2000 in New York City when he was there. And I had heard stories about when he would be introduced, and the fans are taking pictures, and that he would pull out his camera, and that's exactly what he did. He was taking pictures of the fans taking pictures, which was just so heartwarming. Just such a nice guy.
Oh, it is. And all the stars that I had the opportunity to work with were all so nice and so accommodating and so appreciative of everything. And there's some wonderful stories that came out of the conventions, and including one where I got a letter from a young man after the convention, 78 convention was done, and he was having serious emotional issues to the point where he was considering ending his life. I think I still have the letter somewhere, but he came to the 78 convention and he sat down with Nick Tate, and Nick spent time with him, took him off to the side, talked to him. And the young man said, I have a whole new outlook on life because somebody as important as Nick Tate cared to take the time to be with me.
Right.
And, that's all to Nick's credit.
Yeah.
And to me, that was an example of how all of these stars reacted to the conventions and to the fans. They were just tremendous.
That's a priceless moment shared right there. I mean, that makes it all worth it. When you hear something like that, when you hear a story like that, it's so heartwarming.
Yes.
And Nick is such a great guy. I mean,
he really is. Phil, have you ever met Nick? You're going to meet him in September, hopefully.
One of the things I do want to
have met nobody from Space 1999, and that saddens me.
Well, we're going to change that this September. Trust me, my friend.
All right. I look forward to it.
Sorry, Ron.
I'm here. Can you hear me? I'm sorry. My connection went for half a second. What I wanted to say was, and I think it was Ara intervening. I was going to say we kind of touched upon it, and I'm just kind of going back, but in regards to the foreshadowing of this story with that Southern Dominion and everything, the lead up of everything that was happening, and right before, it was such a powerful moment when they decide that what they're going to make the decision whether or not what to do. Do they evacuate Alpha and come to the planet, or do they stay on Alpha? And Jeff, you brought it up earlier too, that there's a lot of back and forth where pretty much Bergman and Helena are just pretty much really almost complacent. They're just kind of going with it, and Koenig is really seeing everything for what it is, having been exposed to Jack. Granted, Bergman almost subjected himself to the experiment, but then you had Cabot saying that it was perfectly safe, that he's taken care of those measures that had actually taken place in the past, which had caused the revered ones. But Koenig is really not buying into it. And then he says that he wants to go to Alpha and tell them everything. And then when Frida kind of jumps in and says, I'll go with you. And then Jack is having that psychic moment really. And he's saying, you shan't go. And then he points to Cabot and says, nor should you. And he said, I tell you, death has dominion. And Jack is really looking at Cabot Rolland, and what happens is he's like, it's almost like a stare down, and then Jack becomes submissive, and then he runs off. I mean, it was such a brilliant
Yeah.
character moment between the two of them, and then the arrogance of Cabot Rolland to laugh at him. He's almost like mocking him, and then Koenig is just again taking it all in and tells Alan to take him to the Eagle, and then he says to Frida, "You know what? If you permit me, I'll speak on your behalf." And then she says, "Thank you." But then there's that moment when Koenig goes into the cave and searches out for Jack, and Jack is he's hiding, all of the emotion and everything that he was dealing with, and it was almost easier for him to bury himself than to deal with everything that had been happening. And again, with the characterization there, Koenig is trying to get through to him and he's not responding, and then what happens is Koenig is about ready to give up, and he says, that says goodbye, and then Jack turns and he grabs Koenig, and it's like Martin again. It's the superior acting between the two of them, but Martin Landau looks, really surprised. I mean, he's a very physical actor and everything, but it's like he really just you see this expression on his face, and that's when he conveys to him, that Thule is a jealous woman. She'll never let us go, never. And it's like, oh my God, what does that mean? And it's just leading up to that climax that's going to happen. I mean, I just want to get your opinions about that, just as we're starting to wind down, because I know we're going up against time a little bit.
Yeah, I think Jack was that whole section was amazing, and especially when Koenig mentions if something about if I win, and Jack goes, "You will."
Yeah,
it's like, well, how do you okay? Why will you?
right.
And then that also brings up questions as to how much did Cabot Roland really know?
Mm-hmm.
Did he know that if he knew that would happen if they left the planet, he probably wouldn't have gone. But
Right.
at the same time, did he have some? It was like, I'm waiting to figure out the change that happened in us before we go anywhere else. Why didn't they try leaving earlier? There's questions about that, but yeah, I think that final scene between Koenig and Jack is just amazingly done.
How about you, Phil?
I think for me, I mean, this episode, I think kind of, as I mentioned before, it kind of scratched my imagination with the idea of like, if I remember correctly, they were saying that this expedition was in '86 or something, and that was supposed to be to Uranus, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, it's just, I want to say something a little more profound, but ultimately, I think that in terms of performances, I would agree that there's there's a lot there that kind of, because I always got the impression that it was Cabot Rolland who was like the main leader for some reason. I think it's just like the gravitas that Brian Blessed kind of brings to any role he does. But yeah, for my money, I think it's something that I wish we would have like learned a little bit more about. And I'm fine with some stories that kind of end with kind of leaving you a little bit more within the ambiguity, as opposed to like being completely out and open with something more specific. So yeah, I think Space 1999 I think kind of benefits from that a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's some episodes where we don't get all of the answers, but
Right.
The fact that we don't get all the answers, I think is still interesting to me, because I don't think we need to have everything laid out or like kind of spoon fed to us. I think that's kind of
Definitely not.
good writing.
It would take away from the show if it had been.
Absolutely. So,
and I think you bring up a
that's
good point. It would have been interesting to see Jack before he had the encounter with the machine, before he had his mind so to speak altered, to see the type of leader he would have been. It would have been interesting to see the discussions that would have taken place between Jack and Cabot Rolland. And I have a feeling that Jack would have been, a stronger figure. Not that he wasn't strong, but his character went in a different direction because of his experience of everything that had happened to him. Yeah. What do you think about that, Warren? You agree?
Yeah, well, and guys, I mean, just on point with everything you guys were just covering. The thing that's stuck in my mind is that we talked earlier that Roland acknowledges Jack Tanner's psychic abilities, right, and is fully aware of them. So it makes one beg the question: why did he go? Right,
Yeah.
because yeah, he would have known, and especially with all the in your face warnings, right? I mean, it's yeah,
I think it's
overall,
the arrogance. The arrogance got the better
you
of him.
used that term, and that's basically what it was, right? He was just he was so proud of his accomplishments, and thought that nothing would stand in his way, as it were. But overall, I mean, and to circle back to Jeff's statement very early on about that shocking ending, right? And as the viewer, it really and we've talked about this several times. It's the unknown and the ambiguity, as Phil said. These are the reasons, guys, that we're still talking about these episodes 50 years later. I think, right? It's if they were episodic bottle episodes, like, not to talk Star Trek TOS, but I mean, it's there's so much more, and there's so much mystery and wonder in the year one storytelling, and that's I think what lends to the longevity of the fascination from the fans.
Yeah, I mean, in that ending, I mean, even before it gets to that point, and then one other thing I want to bring up is there's a nice character moment because again, we hear about, and Jeff brought the, going back, Jeff, I remember those, hearing those stories too, that, in regards to Star Trek and Space 1999, I hate to make the comparisons, but things that you would hear that, Space 1999 didn't have the characterization that Star Trek did. Well, it didn't, because Star Trek was Star Trek and Space 1999 was Space 1999. But if you're doing kind of a side by side, even Koenig and Allen conversing in the Eagle, and Koenig says to Allen, I'd like to count on you for support, and he even says, most times you know that I'm there for you. I mean, he's saying that, but in his mind, he can't wrap around what's going on with Koenig, and then when it's just again that moment where they hear Helena screaming, and they're rushing back there, and it's like, you don't even see it. It's everybody's like, Victor's, by the control panel, and he's like terrified. It's not, I don't even want to say terrified. He's just in shock. And then you have, Matthias, who's also just like in dismay. And then you got poor Helena, who's holding the hand of this person that was really, trying to sell her on this oasis of, Ultima Thule. And then, he's essentially, just decomposing in right as he's she's holding his hand, and it's Koenig who really comes to the rescue of that. And then of course you hear the voice of Jack, that death has dominion, and it's like, whoa, it's like, what just happened, and boom, fade out. And then the next thing we're back on Alpha, and it's parting of the ways, and it's them on Thule essentially saying, what, we're not gonna go down the down the dark road anymore. We're gonna concentrate on the humanity aspects and deal with it, and basically finish out our lives, however that's gonna be. And there's that exchange of goodbye, and then of course the mysticism again of 1999, where Koenig is just lost in deep thought, and he's asking himself the question, which really, I mean, it's a very profound question, is is it death that gives life to, gives meaning to life in the end? And then when he hears Jack say, if there is an end, and it's just like, well, what is that, what I mean, again? And then boom, cut, it just breaks. And then again, it's just that type of ending. It's not open ended, but it is, just because it leads to the question, what just happened and what's going to happen. And it's the brilliance of Space 1999.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Do you know what, guys? And just real quick, this is there's enough here for another episode on its own. But do you think that John Koenig had a destiny, just like Ara said in the previous episode, right? Because it was John that knew the whole time that the gig was up with Ultima Thule, right? I mean, and everybody else was just not seeing it, right? Just like in Collision Course, right? he was really the only one. And even just hearing Jack's voice a couple of times, I've never really thought about this before, but was that Koenig hearing that voice?
I thought it was Koenig hearing that voice, and I'll answer this question. What you just and I'll go first with this. I think everybody has a destiny. It's just that it's a little bit more defined in regards to what Aris said about Koenig. But I think that in regards to Tanner, I think Jack Tanner wanted Koenig to hear it because he had that omnipotence. I mean, I think it was telepathic. You know what I mean in regards to
Yeah,
him
because of his
communicating, because
psychic
of his
ability, right?
ability. So
Yeah,
I think that's why he was able to pick up on it because of what had happened to him in regards to his metamorphosing, so to speak. That's my take on it. It'd be interesting to hear Jeff and Phil's though.
Yeah, I thought of it as Koenig hearing Jack's voice. And, as far as Destiny is concerned, how many times during the series, and it may not have been that many, but did Koenig go against the rising tide of the other Alphans and end up saving them? The first thing that comes to mind is Bringers of Wonder,
Yeah.
where
Mhm.
he's really the only one that, and yes, it was a medical treatment, but still his destiny to have that treatment and see what's really going on.
Yeah.
Um, so, and Roy, I think you're right. Everyone has their destiny and their purpose, and it's just a matter of discovering what that is.
Okay. Phil.
Yeah, I think for me, I mean, I've always had kind of trouble with the concept of destiny, at least in terms of how you place it narratively. I mean, I love plenty of stories that have it as part of the protagonist's main sort of thrust. But in this sense, I think, at least related to this instance, I mean, I can kind of draw a line to, another time, another place, where you have
Sure.
the moon, has been abandoned, and then you have that kind of possible eventuality, and then you have, you draw even further back to Breakaway, where they're saying maybe there, to actually settle on meta.
Mhm.
Um, like I would have liked to have seen, in a subsequent season, them actually get to some place and to kind of fulfill whatever that is, because I was never convinced that, because I was actually of the opinion that uh, another place, another time was going to be like either a possible future or a version of a possible future that they'll be, getting towards eventually. And I guess the way I think of things when I'm writing, I was always imagining that, after Breakaway, they would actually get to meta and see what that's all about. But we never actually, in the entire run of the show, we never actually land on meta and actually see anything there. So yeah, I think that was kind of my, kind of thoughts on how the show would have kind of led to, that could have been what I would see as Koenig's destiny had they gone through with it.
Sure. Yeah. No. Well, wonderful guys, and this has been a really insightful look into a variety of different aspects of the series, our beloved series, of course, and uh, we can't thank you enough. This is Roy. This
Yeah, I want to say thank
one of
you.
the best. One of the best.
Yeah,
This has
it's been a
really
pleasure.
been. Yeah. Yeah.
Pleasure all mine.
Incredible meeting you two fine gentlemen,
Yeah.
and hopefully we're going to see you both in just a few months time here this September. We talked about it, and this is the beauty of it, and all things for all these years with the conventions. And Jeff, you can attest to this better than anybody. It's the bringing everybody together, people who have maybe never met, and forming those bonds and friendships that will have lasted a lifetime already, half a lifetime anyway, and we're happy to continue that tradition with the various projects that Roy and I have been involved with these last few years, and now this new podcast has been wonderful in the same respect.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure meeting you two, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this. And it's an honor to be working with folks who are doing something to keep this series alive and share it with new generations that come up. And you guys are certainly doing that.
I appreciate that.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah.
No, I appreciate you guys for bringing me on and allowing me to share my perspective from somebody who's obviously of the younger rung. But whenever I have kids, I'm definitely going to be showing them Space 1999, all the stuff my dad showed me, because I think that in some ways, I think a lot of this, science fiction of that era has been foundational to what I believe and what I try to, promote as much as I can. And so I want to have that in my own children whenever that ends up happening. So anytime I get a chance to talk anything science fiction, I'm more than happy to do so. And it's really nice to get to know that there's other people out there who kind of share the same interests and love that I do. And it's really nice to meet all of you. And I hope that it's not the last time.
Oh, absolutely. And
Agreed.
there's no age restriction. There's no age restrictions when it comes to Space 1999. That's for sure. And like I said, kind of before pre-show, I'd love to have both of you on my show at some point too. Roy's Tie-Dye Sci-Fi Corner.
Will
So
do.
Yep, certainly.
that would be really good.
Wonderful. Well, listen, on that note, Roy, what do you got coming up on your show?
Yeah, in fact, Ross and I just did a discussion of we remembered David Lynch last night because we discussed Dune, and we're actually going to be talking about that probably in the summertime too. And actually, I brought that up last night, Warren, when we were discussing. So we're going to probably have Warren on as a guest because Warren is a big Twin Peaks fan and David Lynch fan. So we'll do that. And last Sunday, I had to celebrate the 250th episode of the show, I had Adam Nimoy on to celebrate his new book that he has out. So that was really, really a nice thing as well. But the next show will be tomorrow. It's going to be episode 252, and that will be at 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, or excuse me, Eastern Standard Time, EST. We're not doing daylight time right now, so that'll be 7 o'clock, and it's on either YouTube or Facebook. And Phil, you had mentioned Jeffrey Morris. Jeffrey Morris is going to be joining me on the show to talk about the Eagle Obsession. So that'll be tomorrow night at 7 p.m. So
check that out.
Yeah. But so looking forward to that. And again, have you guys on. So thank you for that, Warren. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. And listen, just to finish off here, and I think I started in on this tangent last week, Roy, but I won't drag it out or anything. But one of the reasons I think I gravitated so much towards David Lynch's work over the years, he doesn't have a large body of work, but I mean, all of his projects are very, very, they resonate with people. I think because of the same reason Year One does, and that's that he doesn't give you all the answers, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't wrap things up in a nice little bow, and I think there's some direct correlations there between Space 1999 Year One and his body of work, which was always shrouded in the mystery and making the viewer wonder and think and ponder about the possibilities. So just an interesting little connection there.
Yeah. I love David Lynch, and I can definitely agree with that.
Yeah, 100%. And in September, I'm actually looking forward to coming out to California because there's a couple of sites, of course, that I'd like to visit in honor of Mr. Lynch, for sure.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, fellas, thanks very much again. This has been fantastic. I think we're topping an hour and 40 minutes. So sorry for keeping you guys a little extra, but that's the way these episodes have been rolling.
Absolutely. We've been having a lot of fun with it.
Been a great time.
For sure. So we'll say thank you very much for now, and hopefully we'll see you both very soon. Roy, thank you again, as always.
Thank you, Lauren, as always, too.
Yeah.
And then just to let everybody know, join us. Obviously, this is going to be released on Sunday, which will be the 26th of January. And interesting enough, just for a little bit of a little trivia, January 26, 1976 was actually the first day of shooting for the Year 2 episode of Space 1999, The Metamorph. So it's coming up on its 49th year of anniversary of production beginning.
Wow.
So that will be on tomorrow's date when this episode is released. So there we go with that. And then the other connection with this episode, Death's Other Dominion, it was actually filmed in September. I think filming began September 9th of 1974, and went right over through Breakaway Day. So there's that connection as well.
It was you just jogged my memory when we were in London last September. It was exactly 50 years ago that week that they were filming Death of the Dominion.
Yeah, so there's that connection. But next week we'll be kind of going primitive and discussing Full Circle. So definitely tune in for that.
Perfect. Okay, well, thanks very much to everybody out there. Don't forget to like and subscribe the Space
Please.
1999 This Episode YouTube channel. This really helps with the algorithms. And we will see everybody next week for the Full Circle.
Take care, everyone.
See you, everybody. Thanks again, fellas.
Thanks.
All right. Bye-bye now.
Bye.